I'm Becky Morgam. I represented the 13th District in the State Senate from 1984 to 1993. This district went from San Jose north to San Mateo, basically Silicon Valley. And it was a real honor to represent this high-tech, highly educated district. A district in which, as a Republican running in a Democratic district, I was able to get elected because of my hard work, but also because people appreciated my independence. When I was growing up in the state of Vermont, Senator Margaret Chase Smith was the only woman in the U.S. Senate, and she became my heroine. Independent, taking on Joe McCarthy when he thought everybody was a communist. And I loved her hard work, her independence, her courage. I also admired my father, who was a locally elected official on the school board and what they used to call the Board of Select Men. And I, during those years, was in class council. And then I went on to Cornell, where I was a class officer. In those days, women could only be a vice president of the class. And that's what I was. It was not until the 70s that universities started letting women be the president of their class. That university experience had many benefits, but one of which is when I met my husband, Jim Morgan, my freshman year. You know, I had gotten satisfaction from being elected. I like to take ideas, mostly other people's ideas, and turn them into action, to find a way for solutions to problems. I was lucky. I was recruited at all three levels of office that I've held in California. I was PTA president who had the courage to support the closure of my own children's school because it was so small and I wanted choices for my children's education, choices of teachers. And I was recruited to run for the school board in 1973. From there, I got my MBA at Stanford and worked for Bank of America. But then I got recruited to run for the Santa Clara Board of Supervisors. I got recruited again. And it's always better to run in an open seat than to run against an incumbent. And in 1984, after a redistricting in 1982, it was an open seat. There was no one in that seat. And I was recruited to run. It was a hard decision, but I did it. What was different and how did I get elected? I outworked them. I really did. And I have what I call flash points in campaigns, where you think the tide has turned. And though a flash point for me running for county supervisor was when I went to an event with over 200 people and my opponent wasn't there. I thought, okay, this is good. I'm outworking him and I'm going to make it. When I was running for the Senate, a flashpoint happened in the general election when I was in former Senator Gregorio's hometown of San Mateo, and I was lucky. I drew the straw that let me speak last. And for people running for office, I always recommend try to speak last if you're on a panel. And I think I had a good conclusion. People came up to me afterwards and said, I voted for Mars before, but I'm going to vote for you this time. And that was my flashpoint, and I went on to victory. But probably the most tangible legislation that I passed, and is important for today as well, is saving Caltrain on the Silicon Valley, San Francisco peninsula. So as a new legislator in 1986, I took on the governor of my own party and said, we have to have this train continue. At that point, it's true, there were only about 17,000 riders a day, so it didn't seem very important. Today, there are over 60,000 riders a day. And if you thought of putting those riders on 101 and 280 highways, it would be stymied. I mean, we only go 10 to 15 miles an hour on some of the spots on those highways today. And so the train still runs, and that's the most tangible thing I did as a senator. I did continue to work in education and child care and justice, and appreciate being on the Revenue and Taxation Committee, having had my MBA. You know, I'd like to bring back the kind of bipartisan efforts that we had in the legislature. Yes, we had Republicans and Democrats, but I was blessed because the head of Ways and Means in the Assembly was John Vasconcellos from Silicon Valley, and the head of the Finance Committee was Senator Al Alquist from Silicon Valley. So I benefited from having Democrats from my geography being there, and we had a very good relationship. They didn't always vote with me or I with them, but it was a real bipartisan effort on most things that particularly were important to the Silicon Valley region. And I regret that that doesn't seem to happen anymore. You know, what I would like people to take away from my discussion here today is the value of hard work. I think it's as true today as in 1984 when I ran for the Senate. I outworked my opponents as a woman, as a Republican in a Democratic race, and as a moderate among conservative Republicans. And it paid off, working and also being collaborative. I don't see a lot of collaboration today, and that was very important to me. I also think they should learn how important it is to be out with the people, to be involved in if you want to run for office, be involved in your local communities first. I felt it was a great advantage to having been on the Palo Alto School Board, to having been at the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors. It was great preparation for being a state senator. You know, if I knew then what I know now, and what I take away from that job, I might have played a little more. I had an invitation to the Academy Awards, and I didn't take it because there was an important committee meeting the next week. That was kind of silly. I had a chance to take a trip or two that I didn't take because I thought it was more important to have a good voting record. I'm not sure that voting record made a whit of difference in getting reelected or in getting my legislation passed. And I wouldn't have been quite so conscientious. Being conscientious is my nature, but a little more fun would have been good. And particularly in light of the fact that there wasn't a lot of camaraderie with the other women. We were all, I think, pretty busy going back to our districts, and there were opportunities I may have missed. I had gotten this lovely pantsuit with dark brown wool slacks under it, under the jacket that you see, and I just sort of automatically put it on. I'm a farmer's daughter. I've worn a lot of pants in my life to do the work. I went to the legislature Monday afternoon. We're on the floor. I thought nothing about what I was wearing until a reporter followed me to my office. My regret was that was a female reporter who I suspect was put up to the inquiry from another man, or from a man, either a reporter or a legislator. And she said, "Do you know that you're the first woman to ever wear pants on the Senate floor?" And I hadn't even thought about it. My mother called me shortly thereafter as someone that listened to Paul Harvey, a former radio announcer, and she said, "What are you doing wearing pants on the Senate floor?" I said, "Mother, it was cold, I was warm, I thought it was a good-looking suit, and what do you know about what I've done for kids or transportation?" That became the focus was pretty funny to me. But I tell you, I have had more women come up to me both people that were legislators, staffers, lobbyists, female, and even 20 years later, when I was at a fundraiser, and two women who had been lawyers in San Jose at the time and picked up a newspaper that had the headline of "Morgan wears pants on the Senate floor," and said, "You liberated us." We went to our boss and said, "We are wearing slacks to work from now on. We don't." Let me tell the story of my last day in the state Senate. I had made the decision to leave the Senate in the middle of my term because I had asked Governor Wilson to appoint me as superintendent of schools with my real interest in education. It became obvious that he wasn't going to do that, and in the meantime, I was recruited or I was called to see if I'd like to become the first CEO of a new nonprofit in Silicon Valley called Joint Venture Silicon Valley. And I said, let's talk. I didn't intend to leave in the middle of my term, but term limits had come into play, and I would have been out of office shortly thereafter anyway. And so I had the interview to go back to Silicon Valley, to go home, and had the interviews, was selected. The women of the legislature gave a reception for me as I was leaving, which I very much appreciate, and I still have the crystal capital on my desk at home that was given to me that night. I've had an opportunity since leaving the legislature to talk with a few women who have been wanting to run for office either at the local level or for Sacramento's positions. One of the things that I think is important, even though people can jump into the legislature from a career elsewhere, I really think what I did in growing up from school board to county board to state senate had real value in how I thought about legislation, how I engaged with my constituents, and I really think that kind of stepping stones is helpful. I would also suggest to women, whether they're running for office or not, that it can help in your career to play a sport. I think the first thing that's important to me, as people think about my career, was that I had great integrity, that I was always honest, that I was always polite, and that I like to collaborate with other people. One of the things, I don't think of myself as all that creative and being out there at the point of the arrow with all new ideas, but I think I became very good at taking ideas and turning them into action. One of the things that I think people may forget in the 21st century is that women were really cutting edge. We had women elected in California before they were allowed to vote nationally. Running for office as a woman, you were a minority, and it wasn't easy. So I've always loved this little label that I collected. The ladder to success is harder to climb in heels.